It was just another quiet Tuesday morning at the downtown police station. Officers were sipping their coffee, filling out paperwork, and chatting about their weekend plans when suddenly, the heavy glass doors burst open. The sound made everyone jump, and all eyes turned to see a small figure standing in the doorway, chest heaving, tears streaming down his face. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old. His school backpack was half open, papers threatening to spill out, and his blue uniform shirt was untucked and wrinkled. His sneakers were muddy, suggesting he'd run through the park to get there. What caught everyone's attention wasn't just his dramatic entrance. It was the look of absolute determination on his young face, even through the tears. "Please," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "You have to arrest my mom." The desk sergeant nearly spilled his coffee. Two officers who had been discussing their patrol routes stopped mid-conversation. Even the old ceiling fan seemed to slow down, as if it too was stunned by this unexpected declaration. The boy stood there, his small hands balled into fists at his sides, fighting to catch his breath. It was clear he'd run all the way there, probably straight from school judging by his uniform. His dark brown eyes darted around the room, taking in the shocked faces of the officers, but he didn't back down. "Young man," the desk sergeant said gently, stepping out from behind his desk. He was a kind-faced man with gray hair at his temples who had seen all sorts of strange situations in his 20 years on the force. But this was a new one. "Why don't you come sit down and tell us what's going on?" The boy's chin trembled, but he stood his ground. "No, you don't understand. You have to arrest her right now." His voice echoed through the station, making a few other officers peek out from their offices to see what was happening. A female officer who had been working at her desk quietly approached, carrying a paper cup of water. She knelt down to the boy's level, her movements slow and gentle, like someone approaching a frightened animal. "Here," she said softly, offering him the water. "You look like you could use this. Running all the way here must have been tough." The boy looked at the cup, then at the officer, torn between his urgent mission and his obvious thirst. His shoulders were still rising and falling rapidly from his run, and small beads of sweat dotted his forehead despite the cool morning air. Finally, he accepted the water, taking small sips while his eyes continued to dart between the officers surrounding him. The female officer nodded encouragingly. "That's good. Now, why don't we go sit on that comfortable bench over there? You can tell us about your mom, and we promise to listen to everything you have to say." For a moment, it looked like the boy might refuse again. But exhaustion was starting to replace adrenaline, and his legs were probably tired from running. He gave a small nod and followed the officer to the wooden bench near the wall, still clutching his water cup like a lifeline. The desk sergeant picked up the phone, quietly asking another officer to call the boy's school. They needed to figure out who this child was and make sure his family knew where he was. But everyone could sense this wasn't a simple case of a kid acting out. There was something more to this story, something in the desperate sincerity of his plea that told them they were about to hear something extraordinary. As the boy sat down, his backpack finally gave up its fight with gravity and slumped to the floor, spilling out homework papers and a half-eaten sandwich. He didn't even seem to notice. He was too focused on catching his breath, gathering his thoughts, and preparing to tell these officers why they absolutely, positively had to arrest his mother. The morning light streamed through the station's windows, casting long shadows across the floor, as everyone prepared to hear what could possibly make a young boy want his own mother behind bars. 3 months earlier, the same boy who would later burst into the police station was sitting at their small kitchen table, watching his mom do what seemed like an impossible juggling act. She was simultaneously stirring a pot of mac and cheese, highlighting passages in a thick nursing textbook, and trying to sort through a pile of bills that seemed to grow taller by the day. Their apartment wasn't much. Just a 2-bedroom unit in an old building where the elevator worked only when it felt like it. But his mom had turned it into a home, covering the worn walls with her son's artwork and school certificates. A small corkboard hung near the kitchen, packed with her class schedule, work shifts, and her son's school events, all carefully color-coded and arranged like pieces of a complicated puzzle. That evening, like most evenings, she'd rushed home from her first job at the hospital cafeteria, still wearing her light blue uniform with the small food stain on the sleeve that never quite came out in the wash. Her feet were probably killing her. They always were after standing for 8 hours straight, but she didn't sit down. Instead, she moved around their small kitchen, making dinner while quizzing herself out loud about medical terms that sounded like a foreign language. "Mom," the boy said, watching her drop her highlighter for the third time, "you don't have to check my math homework tonight. I can do it myself." She looked up, dark circles under her eyes, but still managing to smile. "Baby, your education comes first. Always." She glanced at the clock and somehow moved even faster, knowing she had exactly 43 minutes before she needed to leave for her evening shift at the convenience store. The boy noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she poured the mac and cheese into 2 bowls. He pretended not to see when she only took 3 bites of her own dinner before wrapping it up for later. Later that never seemed to come. He was old enough now to understand that sometimes she skipped meals so she could buy his school supplies or pay for his basketball team fees. What she didn't know was that he could hear her late at night, after she got home from her second job, sitting at the kitchen table long after midnight. The sound of pages turning, her quiet muttering as she studied, and sometimes, when things got really tough, the muffled sound of crying she tried to hide. On this particular night, she had to leave before helping him with his homework. "I'm so sorry, sweetie," she said, quickly changing into her convenience store uniform. "Mrs. Chen next door will check on you in an hour. There's snacks in the cabinet, and—" "Mom, I know," he interrupted gently. "I'm not a baby anymore. I'll be fine." She paused at the door, her purse half open, textbook stuffed inside along with her store name tag. For a moment, she just looked at him, and something in her eyes made his chest hurt. Pride, exhaustion, and worry all mixed together in a way that made her look both stronger and more fragile than any mom should have to be. "You're growing up so fast," she whispered, then quickly wiped her eyes. "Okay, emergency numbers air." "On the fridge," he finished. "Go, Mom. You'll be late." After she left, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at his math homework, but not really seeing it. Through the thin walls, he could hear the neighbor's TV, the distant sound of sirens in the city, and the quiet hum of their old refrigerator that sometimes made weird clicking sounds at night. His mom's nursing textbook had fallen open when she stuffed it in her purse. A few of her sticky notes were poking out from between the pages, covered in her neat handwriting that got messier toward the bottom of each note, probably from writing while standing up during her breaks at work. The boy picked up one of the fallen sticky notes. On it, his mom had written, "Remember why you started," and underlined it twice. Below that was a small doodle of what looked like him giving a thumbs up, and it made his throat feel tight. He carefully placed the note back in the textbook, right where it had fallen from. Then he turned to his math homework, determined to get every problem right. It was the least he could do for a mom who was working so hard to give him everything she never had. What he didn't know then was that in just 3 months, everything would change, and it would start with him making a decision that would shock an entire police station and set in motion events that nobody could have predicted. The morning everything started to unravel began with a broken-down car and ended with a discovery that would change their lives forever. It was one of those bitter winter days where the wind seemed to cut right through your clothes, no matter how many layers you wore. The boy woke up to find the apartment unusually quiet. Usually, he could hear his mom getting ready for work, the sound of the coffee maker gurgling, or her whispered medical terms as she studied. But today, there was nothing. Just silence and the faint sound of traffic outside their window. He found a note on the kitchen counter, held down by his favorite cereal bowl. Car won't start. Had to leave early to catch the bus. Breakfast is ready. Love you. Next to it was a perfectly made peanut butter and banana sandwich, cut into triangles the way he liked it, with the crust removed. That afternoon, instead of heading straight home from school, something made him take a different route. Maybe it was curiosity about how his mom was getting to work, or maybe it was just one of those gut feelings kids sometimes get about their parents. Whatever it was, it led him to a sight he would never forget. There was his mom, walking along the side of the road, her uniform coat pulled tight against the cold. She was moving quickly, but he could tell she was tired. Every few steps, she would adjust the heavy bag on her shoulder, the one that always carried her nursing textbooks. Cars rushed past her, sending up sprays of dirty slush, forcing her to step back from the road. The boy ducked behind a tree, his heart pounding. 4 miles. He knew it was 4 miles from their apartment to the hospital because they'd driven it so many times. And now his mom was walking it. In the cold. Because the car she bought secondhand, the one she'd been so proud of, had finally given up. But what really got to him wasn't the walking. It was remembering how she'd told him she was carpooling with coworkers. How she'd come home every night with a smile, never mentioning her aching feet or the long walk. She'd even made up stories about funny things her carpool friends had said. He watched as she stopped at a corner, pulling out a granola bar from her pocket. Lunch, he realized with a sinking feeling. That was her lunch. The same kind of granola bar she always packed several of, claiming they were perfect snacks for studying. A light drizzle started to fall, and his mom pulled her hood up, quickening her pace. She still had another 3 miles to walk to get to her second job after her hospital shift. 6 hours on her feet serving food, then another 6 hours standing behind a store counter, and all that walking in between. The boy felt something hot and angry building in his chest. Not angry at his mom. Angry at the world that made her work so hard. Angry at the broken-down car, at the expensive nursing school, at every little thing that kept pushing against her no matter how hard she tried. He followed her for another block, staying far enough behind that she wouldn't notice. He watched how she kept her head high, how she would sometimes move her lips silently, probably reviewing her nursing notes in her head, making use of every minute she had. At one point, she stopped to help an elderly man who had dropped his groceries, kneeling down to pick up scattered oranges despite clearly being in a hurry. That was his mom, always helping others even when she could barely help herself. The boy turned back before she could spot him, his mind racing. Something had to change. This couldn't go on. His mom was the strongest person he knew, but everybody has a breaking point, and he was starting to worry that hers was getting closer every day. What he didn't know then was that this was just the beginning. The next discovery he would make would be even worse, and it would lead him to make a decision that would seem crazy to everyone else. Everyone except a 10-year-old boy desperate to help his mother the only way he could think of. As he walked home, the drizzle turned to proper rain, but he barely noticed. He was too busy thinking, planning, trying to figure out how to fix things. Because that's what his mom had always taught him. When something's broken, you don't give up. You find a way to fix it. Even if your solution ends up being something nobody would ever expect. It's funny how the biggest discoveries often happen by accident. The boy was just trying to help by cleaning his mom's room while she was at work, something to make her smile after another long day. He started with the basics, making the bed, picking up clothes, organizing the pile of papers that had slowly taken over her small desk. That's when he found it. The letter had fallen behind her dresser, crumpled like someone had squeezed it in frustration before trying to throw it away. He probably shouldn't have read it, but the bold red "Final note I see" at the top caught his eye before he could stop himself. The letter was from the nursing school, written in the cold, formal language of institutions that don't care about personal struggles. Words jumped out at him. Academic probation, missed classes, attendance requirements not met. But it was the last line that made his stomach drop. If immediate action is not taken, dismissal from the program will be necessary. His hands trembling, he smoothed out the paper, trying to make sense of it. His mom had never missed a class. She was always studying, always talking about her lessons, always. Then it hit him. Those days when she said she had study group, but came home smelling like the convenience store. The optional review sessions that somehow always fell on the days she picked up extra shifts. She had been skipping classes to work. The discovery sent him looking deeper, though something in his heart told him he wouldn't like what he'd find. In her dresser drawer, underneath a stack of old t-shirts, he found more letters. Past due notices for the electric bill. A warning about the car payment. A letter from their landlord about late rent. But it was the small pink slip at the bottom of the pile that really broke his heart. A pawn shop receipt for one white gold ring with diamond accent. He knew that ring. It had belonged to his grandmother, the only thing of value their family had ever owned. His mom used to twist it on her finger when she was nervous or thinking hard about something. He hadn't seen her wearing it lately, but he'd assumed. The sound of paper crumpling made him realize he was gripping the receipt too tight. Carefully, he smoothed it out, just like his mom always did with his crumpled homework papers. That's when he noticed the date on the receipt. Just 3 days after she'd bought his new basketball shoes. The shoes he'd begged for because everyone else on the team has them. He sat down hard on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of his mom's silent struggles. All those times she'd said she wasn't hungry at dinner. Those overtime shifts that seemed to multiply. The way she'd started using the stairs instead of paying to fix the car's broken fuel gauge. It all made horrible sense now. A small notebook caught his eye, sticking out from under her pillow. Her budget book, where she tracked every penny. The latest entry made his vision blur with tears. Gas to get to work, $15. Bus fare backup, $10. Groceries, $45. Light bill, past due. Son's school lunch, $25. Nursing school payment. The question marks at the end looked like they'd been drawn and redrawn, pressed harder into the paper each time, like she was trying to make an answer appear by sheer force of will. Near the bottom of the page, in his mom's neat handwriting, was a quote, "Just keep swimming." She decorated it with little waves, trying to make it cheerful. But some of the ink was smudged in a way that made him think she'd been crying when she wrote it. The sound of a car honking outside snapped him back to reality. He had to put everything back exactly as he found it. His mom could never know he'd seen all this. She worked so hard to protect him from worrying, to make him feel like everything was okay. But now that he knew the truth, he couldn't unknow it. He couldn't unsee the evidence of her sacrifice, couldn't unfeel the weight of what she was carrying alone. As he carefully replaced each paper, each bill, each piece of his mom's private struggle, something shifted inside him. A determination took root, growing stronger with each passing minute. He had to do something. Something big. Something that would change everything. He just didn't know what. Not yet. But as he finished cleaning the room, making sure everything looked untouched, an idea began to form in the back of his mind. A crazy idea. The kind of idea that only makes sense when you're young enough to believe that sometimes the craziest solutions are the only ones that might work. That night, the boy couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at his ceiling where the streetlight outside made shadows dance through his thin curtains. The sound of quiet sobbing drifted through the wall. His mom trying to cry silently, probably thinking he was asleep. Each muffled sound felt like a punch to his chest. He pulled his blanket up to his chin, remembering last week's school assembly about famous people who'd gone to prison. The speaker, a former inmate turned motivational speaker, had talked about how he'd gotten his college degree behind bars. Free education, he'd said. 3 meals a day, a roof over your head, and all the time you need to study. The boy had dozed off during most of the assembly, but now those words kept echoing in his head. Free education. free food, no bills to pay. Rolling over, he grabbed his tablet from the bedside table, careful to muffle its glow under his blanket so his mom wouldn't see the light under his door. His fingers moved quickly across the screen as he searched. Do prisoners get free college education? Article after article confirmed what the speaker had said. Some prisons had whole programs for inmates who wanted to study. They got books, teachers, even time set aside specifically for learning. No rushing between jobs, no choosing between buying textbooks or paying the electric bill. The more he read, the more his crazy idea started to feel less crazy. His mom needed 3 things: education, food, and a place to stay. Prison offered all 3. Plus, she wouldn't have to work 2 jobs anymore. She could finally focus on her nursing studies without worrying about money. He thought about the day's earlier discovery. All those bills, the pawned ring, the nursing school warning letter. His mom was drowning, trying to keep them both afloat. Maybe, just maybe, prison could be like a life raft. The boy sat up in bed, his heart racing with the kind of certainty that only comes when you're young enough to believe impossible things might work. He grabbed his school notebook and a flashlight, starting to make a list. Good things about prison: free food, 3 meals every day, free place to sleep, free college, no bills to pay, time to study, no more walking in the rain, no more skipping meals. He paused, chewing on his pencil. There had to be a catch, right? Adults were always saying if something seemed too good to be true, it probably was. But right now, seeing his mom struggle felt worse than any catch could be. Through the wall, he heard his mom's alarm go off. 3:30 a.m., time for her to start studying before her morning shift. The sound of her chair scraping across the kitchen floor, the quiet click of the coffee maker, the rustle of textbook pages. She was trying so hard, and it still wasn't enough. The boy looked down at his list again, adding one more item. Mom won't have to cry at night anymore. A car alarm went off somewhere in the distance, making him jump. He quickly shoved his notebook under his pillow as his mom's footsteps passed his door, probably checking if the noise had woken him. He lay very still, pretending to be asleep, until she went back to her studying. In the quiet that followed, his plan started taking more shape. He'd learned in science class that sometimes the simplest solution is the right one. This seemed pretty simple. His mom needed help, and prison had everything she needed. Sure, it wasn't a normal solution, but nothing about their situation was normal. Tomorrow was Monday. He had school in the morning, but the police station was only a few blocks away. He could go right after his last class. They'd have to listen to him. He'd make them understand why this was the only way to help his mom. As he finally drifted off to sleep, the boy felt something he hadn't felt in a while: hope. His plan might sound crazy to everyone else, but sometimes crazy was exactly what you needed when normal solutions weren't working. What he didn't know was that his simple plan would soon set off a chain of events that would change not just his family's life, but an entire community. But for now, he slept, dreaming of his mom finally getting her nursing degree, even if the graduation ceremony had to happen behind prison walls. Back in the police station, the boy sat on the wooden bench, his hands wrapped around the paper cup of water. The female officer knelt in front of him, while other officers gathered nearby, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. The morning sun streaming through the windows made dust motes dance in the air, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere in the usually busy station. So, the female officer said gently, "Tell us why you think your mom needs to be arrested." The boy took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly around the cup. "She works too hard," he blurted out, then seemed frustrated at how simple that sounded. "No, you don't understand. She works all the time. At the hospital. At the store. Walking for miles because our car broke down." His words started tumbling out faster, like a dam breaking. "She skips meals so I can eat. She pawned my grandma's ring to buy my basketball shoes. She's failing nursing school because she has to work instead of going to class. And his voice cracked. And I hear her crying at night when she thinks I'm asleep. The officers exchanged glances. The desk sergeant pulled up a chair, sitting down with a creak of leather and metal. Son, those aren't crimes. Those are sacrifices. Your mom sounds like she's trying her best to take care of you. I know. The boy's sudden shout made several people jump. That's why you have to arrest her. In prison, she'll get free food and a place to sleep. She can study and get her nursing degree. I heard a man talk about it at school. Prisoners get all that stuff for free. The silence that followed was heavy. Through the station's windows, they could hear the normal sounds of the city: car horns, distant sirens, the rumble of buses. But inside, everyone was processing the heartbreaking logic of a child trying to solve an adult problem the only way he could think of. The female officer gently took the now empty paper cup from the boy's hands. When I was about your age, she said quietly, my mom worked 3 jobs. She used to put me to bed in the back room of the diner where she worked nights. I thought if I could just be better, quieter, smarter, less needy, everything would be okay. The boy looked up at her, his eyes wide. Did it get better? She smiled softly. It did. But not because I found some clever solution. It got better because people in our community finally saw how hard she was working and came together to help. Sometimes the best answer isn't trying to fix everything yourself. It's letting others help. But who's going to help us? The boy asked, his voice small. Mom won't even tell people things are bad. She just keeps saying everything's fine. The desk sergeant cleared his throat. Well, you just told us. And now that we know, we can't just ignore it, can we? He looked around at his fellow officers, who were all nodding in agreement. One of the officers stepped forward, holding the boy's backpack he'd picked up from the floor. A homework assignment had fallen out. A math worksheet with every problem solved correctly, the margins filled with extra work showing all his steps. You're good at math, the officer noted, looking at the worksheet. Just like your mom must be good at nursing, even if she's struggling to finish school. Sometimes the best solutions are hiding in plain sight. We just need the right people to help us see them. The boy looked around the room, taking in all the faces watching him with understanding instead of judgment. For the first time since bursting into the station, his shoulders relaxed slightly. Does this mean you won't arrest my mom? He asked, sounding both relieved and disappointed. The female officer smiled. No, we won't arrest your mom. But we are going to help her. And you know what? I think your crazy plan might have been the smartest thing anyone could have done. Sometimes it takes a child's wisdom to make adults see what really matters. Outside, the morning was shifting into full day, sunlight streaming stronger through the windows. The usual buzz of the police station was starting to pick up, but the small group remained focused on the boy who'd brought them more than just an unusual request. He brought them a reminder of what community really means. What nobody knew yet was that this was just the beginning. The boy's desperate plan was about to spark something much bigger than anyone in that room could have imagined. News travels fast in a small community, especially when it's a story that touches people's hearts. By the end of that day, the tale of the boy who wanted his mom arrested had spread through the police department like wildfire. Each person who heard it felt something stir inside them, a memory of their own struggles or those of someone they loved. The female officer couldn't stop thinking about the situation after her shift ended. Instead of heading home, she stopped by the local diner where her friend worked as a waitress. Over a cup of coffee, she shared the story. The waitress told the cook, who told the owner, who happened to be on the board of the local business association. A single mom walking miles to work because her car broke down. The diner owner shook his head, picking up his phone. My brother owns that repair shop on 5th Street. Let me make a call. At the same moment, across town, the desk sergeant was sitting in his weekly church group, the boy's words still echoing in his mind. When it was his turn to speak, instead of discussing the planned topic, He found himself telling the group about the morning's events. The room fell silent, except for a few sniffles from those trying to hold back tears. "My daughter's in nursing school," one woman said, standing up. "She has a study group that meets twice a week. They'd be happy to add one more." "I drive past the hospital every morning on my way to work," another member added. "Carpooling is better for the environment anyway." The spark of compassion caught fire, spreading from person to person, group to group. A local coffee shop owner heard the story and remembered her own days as a struggling student. She started setting aside day-old pastries and sandwiches, food that would have been thrown out anyway. "It's not much," she said, "but it's something." The story reached the local news station through a reporter who'd stopped by the police station for a routine story. Instead, she found herself captivated by this different kind of news, not about crime or politics, but about a child's love for his mother and a community's response to it. When the story aired that evening, phones started ringing across the city. A local mechanic called the station, offering to fix the mom's car for free. "My mom raised 4 kids on her own," he explained. "Never asked for help once. Someone should have helped her." The nursing school dean watched the news report in her office, tears in her eyes. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. By morning, she had organized a special flexible program for working parents, with recorded lectures and evening study sessions. Sometimes, she told her staff, "We need to change the system instead of expecting people to break themselves fitting into it." But it wasn't just big gestures. Small acts of kindness started popping up everywhere. A grocery store clerk began slipping extra coupons into the bags of customers she knew were struggling. A local bus driver stopped enforcing fares for people he recognized walking to work in uniforms. Children started asking their parents what they could do to help other families in their neighborhood. The police station, which had seen so many sad stories over the years, became an unexpected hub of hope. Officers set up a small donation box in the lobby. Within days, it overflowed with grocery store gift cards, bus passes, and handwritten notes of encouragement. "It's like everyone was just waiting for permission to care," the female officer observed, watching another community member drop off a gift card. "All it took was one brave little boy to remind us what community really means." The desk sergeant nodded, thinking about how a child's simple, impossible request had unlocked something in all of them. "Sometimes the best police work isn't about enforcing laws," he said. "It's about protecting hope." What started as one boy's desperate plan to help his mother was transforming into something bigger, a reminder that no one should have to struggle alone, that asking for help isn't weakness, and that sometimes the craziest ideas can open hearts and change lives in ways no one expects. And this was just the beginning. Because when a community decides to care, amazing things start to happen. The kind of things that make even the hardest hearts believe in miracles again. The hardest part wasn't organizing all the help. It was figuring out how to tell his mom about it. The boy sat in the police station's break room, swinging his legs nervously while the officers made calls to his mom's workplace. He could hear snippets of their conversations. "Yes, she's fine." "No, no trouble. Could you ask her to come to the station? It's important." His mom burst through the station doors 20 minutes later, still in her hospital cafeteria uniform, her face pale with worry. The moment she saw him, she ran forward, pulling him into a tight hug that smelled of coffee and hospital disinfectant. "Baby, what happened? Are you okay? Why aren't you in school?" The questions tumbled out as she checked him over for injuries, her hands trembling slightly. "Mom," he said, his voice muffled against her uniform. "I'm sorry. I did something kind of crazy." The female officer stepped forward then, gently leading them both to chairs. As they explained everything, the boy's discovery of the bills, his worry about the nursing school letter, his desperate plan to help, his mom's expression changed from confusion to shock to something between embarrassment and overwhelm. I don't understand," she whispered, looking around at the gathered officers and community members who had arrived. Why would you all? The diner owner stepped forward. Because that's what neighbors do, he said simply. We help each other. We've just gotten too busy lately to remember that. One by one, people started sharing what they could offer. The mechanic explained about fixing her car. The nursing school dean described the new flexible program. The coffee shop owner talked about the food she could provide. Each offer made his mom's eyes wider, her hands clasping tighter in her lap. I can't accept all this, she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. It's too much. I've always managed on my own. Mom, the boy interrupted, taking her hand. Remember what you always tell me. About how being smart isn't about knowing everything, but about knowing when to ask for help. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression crumbled. When did you get so wise? She asked softly, touching his cheek. Learned it from you, he shrugged. Even if you don't always follow your own advice. A laugh bubbled up through her tears, and suddenly the tension in the room broke. People started sharing stories about their own struggles, about times they needed help, about times they wished they'd asked for it sooner. The desk sergeant brought over coffee and donuts from the break room. Someone ordered pizza. The police station transformed into something between a community center and a family gathering, with people coming and going, sharing ideas, making plans. His mom sat in the middle of it all, still looking slightly dazed, but starting to smile more. When the nursing school dean showed her the new class schedule, designed to work around her jobs, she actually cried. But this time, they were happy tears. I don't know how to thank everyone, she kept saying, but people just shook their heads. Thank your son, the female officer said. He was brave enough to ask for help when you couldn't. Sometimes our kids show us the way. Looking around the room, the boy saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope in his mom's eyes. Not the tired kind of hope that comes from just trying to make it through another day, but real hope. The kind that makes you believe things can actually get better. As evening approached, more people kept arriving. Someone brought guitars. Another person started organizing a schedule for rides to work and study sessions. The local newspaper showed up to take pictures, not of sad faces or struggles, but of community and connection. The story was changing. It wasn't just about a boy trying to get his mom arrested anymore. It had become something bigger. A story about how one child's desperate plan had reminded an entire community what it means to take care of each other. And his mom. She sat there holding his hand, watching it all unfold, finally accepting that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let people help you stand up when you've been carrying too much for too long. 2 years later, the boy sat in the community college auditorium, his heart about to burst with pride. The room was packed with families, but he could easily spot all the familiar faces: the female officer who'd first helped them, the desk sergeant who'd brought them coffee that day, the mechanic who'd fixed their car, the diner owner who still saved them leftovers sometimes. His mom stood at the podium in her nursing school graduation gown, the gold honor society cords gleaming around her neck. She looked different now, still tired sometimes, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that comes from achieving something, not from just trying to survive. When my son tried to get me arrested 2 years ago, she began, and soft laughter rippled through the crowd. I thought it was the most embarrassing moment of my life. Now I know it was actually the most beautiful. The boy felt his chest swell with emotion as his mom continued her valedictorian speech. She hadn't just passed nursing school. She graduated at the top of her class. Turns out it's easier to get good grades when you're not walking miles in the rain or skipping meals to buy textbooks. People asked me how I did it, his mom said, her voice strong and clear. The truth is, I didn't do it alone. I had a community behind me. A community that my 10-year-old son was brave enough to ask for help when I was too proud to do it myself. From his seat, he could see the coffee shop owner wiping her eyes with a napkin. The nursing school dean was beaming like a proud parent. Even the usually tough desk surgeon was trying to pretend he wasn't getting emotional. But this isn't just my story, his mom continued. In the past 2 years, our community has helped 12 other single parents complete their education. The flexible program we started has spread to 3 other nursing schools. The community support network that began in a police station now has 500 members. She was right. That day in the police station had started something bigger than any of them. The local news had dubbed it the Arrest Mom movement, though his mom still got embarrassed when people called it that. It wasn't just about helping single parents anymore. It was about remembering that everyone needs help sometimes, and that's okay. Today, I'm not just graduating, his mom said, her voice catching slightly. I'm starting my dream job at the same hospital where I used to serve lunch. And next week, I'll be mentoring another single mom who's just starting her journey. The boy felt a hand squeeze his shoulder. It was the female officer, who'd become like family over the past 2 years. You did good, kid, she whispered. After the ceremony, they all gathered in the hospital cafeteria, the same one where his mom used to work. But this time, she wasn't serving food. She was celebrating with her new colleagues, her nursing degree pinned proudly to her white coat. The boy watched as people hugged his mom, shook her hand, took pictures. She looked happy, not the pretend kind of happy she used to be, but real, deep down happy. The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Later that night, as they walked to their car, the same one the mechanic had fixed, still running perfectly, his mom stopped and pulled him into a tight hug. You know, she said softly, most kids would have just asked for help in a normal way. He grinned against her shoulder. Since when has our family done anything the normal way? She laughed, a free, joyful sound that echoed in the quiet parking lot. True, but you know what? Sometimes the craziest plans turn out to be the best ones. As they drove home, past the police station where it all began, past the diner where they still had a standing Sunday breakfast invitation, past the coffee shop that still saved them pastries sometimes, the boy realized something important. Sometimes the best endings don't look anything like what you imagined. Sometimes they're even better. His mom wasn't in prison like he planned. Instead, she was free. Free from crushing debt. Free from endless struggling. Free to finally be the nurse she'd always dreamed of being. And maybe that was the best kind of freedom of all.